Good afternoon, everyone. Before we get started, I'd like to ask everyone to please take out your cell phone and make sure that it's on silent or turn it off so that our service is not interrupted by the pings and the dial tones that come. So even if you think you did it, take it out and double check. Sometimes it's me who leaves it in my pocket. There are many rituals and traditions that are a part of the process of mourning in Jewish life. And we are going to practice, we're going to engage in some of those rituals today. One of them is called Kriya, which literally means tearing. More traditional Jews, when they hear of the death of a loved one or at a memorial service, will actually tear or rip their garment, a pocket or a lapel, some cut, a tie. And I think the best way to explain it is as a type of catharsis. We're filled with so much emotion and so much energy in the face of a loss, especially a tragic loss. And that tearing is a way for us to channel some of that energy. And it also is a physical representation of the way we feel inside, which is torn and broken. And so today we're going to, the family, do the ritual of Kriya, not by tearing their clothing, but by using a small black ribbon, a Kriya ribbon we call it, which serves the same purpose, accompanied by a blessing, which then becomes also a symbol that they are in mourning. And you can choose to wear it today or for 7 days, which is the first period of mourning, or for 30 days, which is the next tier on the mourning process. Both for you to have it close to your heart and for others to be reminded that you are in mourning, that you need our love and support, which we hope to give you today. So I'll ask the family to stand and repeat the words of the blessing after me. Baruch atah Adonai Dayan ha'emet. Praised are you, O God, Judge of truth. And now go ahead and tear the ribbon. And you may be seated.
May the Holy One comfort you. Hamakom Yenachem etchem. May our love embrace you. B'toch sha'ar avilet Zion v'Yerushalayim. May his memory bring you peace, bring you strength, and be a blessing. Hamakom Yenachem etchem. shahar havilet Zion Yerushalayim. May his memory bring you peace, bring you strength, and be a blessing. Hamakom Yinachem, Yinachem etchem. May the Holy One comfort you. Hamakom Yinachem, Yinachem etchem.
Adonai, Ma'adam v'teda ehu, ben enosh v'tachashvehu. Adonai, O God, it is beyond our grasp that our lives should truly make a difference, that you or anyone would notice. For in the scope of this vast universe, we are like a passing breath. Our days are like a passing shadow. We come and we go like grass, which in the morning shoots up renewed, and in the evening fades and withers. At the end of our lives, it is ordained that we return to the earth, that we are at one with all creation. Our souls, however, our souls continue on to eternity. If only we were wise, that we understood what happens when our days on earth have ended, then death would not be seen as a total ending. For when we die, we carry nothing away, because our deeds on earth and the love that we gave and shared, that does not disappear, but lives on through those we touched and treasured. This past week since Eric's passing has been a total nightmare. And we all waited to wake up and find that it was just a terrible dream. But we must face somehow the reality of this moment, the reality that we are here as a gathering of mourners today, to hold one another and to comfort one another and to pay tribute to a life that was taken far too soon. And it's not fair. And we will never know why. But those answers are beyond the limits of our mortal knowledge. Jewish tradition encourages us not to ask in these matters the question why. It instructs us to ask in the words of Eicha, Lamentations, the question how, which is not why was Eric taken from us, but how will we make it through today and tomorrow and the weeks and the months to come as we face his loss? And how will we find the appropriate and meaningful ways to give honor to his memory, to repay his kindness and his love in the years that we have left by passing it along to others? These are the questions we need to ask today as we hold one another and as we find the words and the stories to celebrate Eric's life. and there are a lot of them. Great stories to tell. Nancy and Sarah and Josh and Bev and Jack and Paul and all the aunts and uncles and cousins and good friends, those of you joining us online, all of you. We are here today for Eric, but we are also here today for you. So please find strength in and healing in this gathering. We pray that even in the depths of your sorrow, you will be lifted up and that you will find blessing. You know that is what Eric would want for you. You know how much Eric loved you. You know how much Eric loved being with you and sharing good food and the company of good friends. So that's what we're going to do today as we give honor to his memory. There are a few traditional prayers and readings that define the Jewish memorial service, and many of them are familiar to Christians as well, for they are a part of a shared tradition. That thing Christians call the Old Testament, we just call the Bible, the Torah. And there are beautiful readings from Psalms and other parts of that shared tradition that we have read throughout the ages and throughout the generations, especially at these times, when we look for comfort, when we look for guidance, when we look for foundation from our faith. And one of those readings comes from Psalms, the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And a lot of the words there are odd and foreign to us because they talk about things that are a part of the ancient past. Thou hast anointed my head with oil. But there's one line in that psalm that rings a bell. Something that's so pertinent, I think, at a memorial. And it's that line about walking through the valley of the shadows. Because anyone who has lost a treasured loved one understands and knows about that dark place in which we find ourselves when we're mourning. But the wisdom of the psalm, I think, is that we need to spend some time there. We need to put our everyday lives aside for a time, and we need to feel the pain and experience the emotions, which are a direct measure of the love we have for that special person. So we need to spend some time there. But also the teaching is that we don't stay there. We walk through the valley of the shadows because after our time of mourning, we need to walk forward into life. And Eric was such a exuberant, life-affirming, crazy person. Always moving and doing something. And you know that's what he would want for you. After this time of mourning, to move forward and to make that a living tribute to him. So I invite you to join me, if you can, in reciting the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. L'chol zman ve'et l'chol chafetz tachat hashamayim. For everything there is a season and a time for every experience under heaven. Eit loledet ve'et lamud. Time to be born and a time to die. Eit la ta'at ve'et la kor natua. A time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted. A time to tear down and a time to build up. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to throw stones and a time to gather stones. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to seek and a time to lose. A time to tear and a time to sow. A time to keep silence and a time to speak. Life is a succession of suns and season. It is time spent growing, grasping, and giving. It is warmth and wonder, cold and confusion. It is love. Life is love. And life is love lost. Life is heartache moderated by happiness. Life is all this because life is an uncharted journey. Life is pain and passion too. Life is loneliness and loveliness too. Life should be unending. What of the loves not lived, the labors left unfinished, the wishes only whispered, and the words still left unspoken? We, the living, we are the loved. We are the dreams fulfilled. We are the promises of what is past and the fashioners of what is yet to come. Through us, the past lives on. Upon our deeds and our words and our kindness rests the quality of the future. All these prayers we recite today, the El Malei Rachamim, the 23rd Psalm, the Mourner's Kaddish, these are for us. They're for the living. They are our verbal response to the sadness surrounded by beauty, the gift of life and love. They remind us of a warm past, and they challenge us to perpetuate this warmth in the weeks and the months and the years ahead for ourselves and for the generations yet to come. When we come to a memorial, we all come with our own memories and our own stories. And I'm sure everyone here has a wonderful memory and perhaps a good story to tell about Eric. Such a good husband and father and brother. Such a loyal friend. Such an amazing doctor. So I want to invite everyone to take a few moments, a few quiet moments, to pray in your own way and to bring up those memories that you have of Eric. Think about him and reflect on how he touched you.
with me in my heart, with me in my soul. Wherever I go, you're with me. With me through my dreams, although sometimes it might seem like I'm alone. You're with me, and all I have to do is think of you. There is no time, no place there's ever been an empty space. 'Cause you've been with me, you're the spark, the breath of life, the perfect part that fills me with strength and wisdom and peace. You're with me day and night, even when I question what I know is right. You're with me, and all I have to do is think of you. There is no time, no place there's ever been an empty space. 'Cause you've been with me, you're the spark, the breath of life, the perfect part that fills me with strength and wisdom and peace. You're with me day and night, even when I question what I know is right. When I lose sight and start to pray, and right away I know you're with me. You're with me.
Eric Friedman was one of those very rare people who could access both sides of his brain. He had both the logical, analytical, scientific, and orderly characteristics of the right brain individual, and the artistic, creative, empathic qualities of those who are left brain dominant. He was a brilliant man, a human sponge when it came to learning and acquiring both knowledge and skill, and he was good at whatever he put his mind to. But he was also a talented artist and a musician who saw the world of beauty around him as only left-brained individuals do. And he liked nothing better than going out into nature and hiking or biking or skiing or running and pushing his body to the limit. He looked much younger than his 64 years because he was in such good shape. And in some ways, he was just a big kid. But in spite of all his talents and accomplishments, Eric was as humble as they come. When people asked him what he did, he didn't say, "I'm a doctor." He just said, "I work at the hospital," like he was an orderly. And in spite of being a highly respected physician, he used to joke and say, "I'm just a plumber. I just happen to work on bodies and not toilets." Eric was born in Toronto in 1958, the fourth and youngest child in the family, although one of his siblings died at a young age before Eric was born. As a kid, he was the wild one, of the family, always moving and jumping and climbing and always pushing boundaries against his mother's attempts to control him. She was overly protective in many ways, perhaps due to the loss of that child. And Eric knew how to push her buttons and tempt fate. He fell out of many trees on more than one occasion. In school, he was the class clown, purposely falling out of his chair to make everyone laugh, and he always surrounded himself with a lot of friends. But he was a good kid, kind and sweet, and always conscious of the kids on the outskirts. He went out of his way to include them and welcome them in. His parents were both card-carrying members of the Canadian Communist Party. And although his father made a comfortable living as a pharmacist, they lived a very humble lifestyle. They would eschew anything ostentatious. So did Eric. They were secular Jews, but they were proud Jews, not ashamed of their Jewish identity, and they passed all these values down to Eric. Like most Jewish parents, they also made education a primary value, and there was no question that all their kids were going to college and pursuing professions, which they did. Like most Canadians, Eric could ice skate before he could walk. And he took to hockey like a duck to water. He played his entire life, something he joyfully shared with his son Josh. They played together. He also played football in both high school and college and was a natural athlete. And Eric was an excellent student, and he didn't have to work very hard to get good grades. This bugged his older brother Paul to no end. And the two of them always competed with one another in everything they did. Now, I've painted a rosy picture so far of Eric's young life. And it was a good life, filled with family, and friends, and great contentment. But all this happiness came tumbling down when life threw the family an unexpected curveball. Eric's mom was misdiagnosed, at least at first, with stage 4 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. She died when Eric was only 12, shortly before his bar mitzvah. To make matters even worse, his father died of a heart attack about 3.5 years later, after a second marriage that was rocky from the start. The one good thing for Eric that came from that second marriage was Eric's very close, lifelong relationship with his stepbrother Jack, who, by the way, has a lot of good stories to tell about the antics they would pull when they lived together. But I'll leave those for him to tell. When his father died, Eric and Paul, now orphans, went to live with their older sister Bev. And although it was for only a few years before taking off to college, Bev became very much a mother figure to Eric. It was a relationship he always cherished. So fast forward to college. Eric went to the University of Toronto and was pre-med from the get-go. There were lots of doctors in this family, so that wasn't an out-of-left-field choice on his part. But he truly went into medicine for all the right reasons. He wanted to help others, to be of service to humanity. And with his intelligence and all his natural abilities, it was a perfect fit. He went to the Ontario College of Art and Medical School, and his first thought was that he would become a pediatrician. That also, with his affable, warm personality, seemed like a perfect fit. But during his pediatrics rotation, he encountered a very sick young patient who just wanted to die, and other kids who were suffering. And this was so painful for Eric to watch. It just tore at his soul. So he switched his specialty to urology. After medical school, while waiting to begin his urology residency, he had some open time on his calendar, so Eric volunteered to go to Africa to serve at a village hospital. What he didn't realize was that the doctor he was working under was not committed to stay, leaving Eric all alone to run the clinic and to be the sole doctor for a huge territory. You're going to hear a few stories about it from his good friend Elliot, who saw him in action. It was quite an experience working in primitive conditions, which he did for 2 years, receiving unusual payment for his services sometimes, like the time Massa chief gave him a goat. There's a whole wall at the Freedman home with scary masks and other African memorabilia from his time there. If you go to the house, go find that wall. Turn on the light first. Before I talk a little more about Eric's work as a dedicated doctor, I need to take a step back and talk about how Eric met Nancy, his devoted wife, and the love of his life. One of the things that was and is important to the Friedman family is time spent at Jewish camp in the summer, which is something Eric did as a kid. When he was 19, he got a job as waterfront director at Camp Manitoba, and it was there where Eric and Nancy first met. It was a little unusual because Nancy was not quite yet a member of the tribe, and she stood out with her blonde hair and light green eyes, in a good way. Long story, but she was there as a tennis instructor, and the two hit it off. She was only 17, and it was just a summer romance. But the two never forgot about each other. So fast forward 13 years, and Nancy is now a nurse, and Eric a doctor, doing a fellowship in the same hospital where Nancy worked in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Nancy's hometown. And months had passed, and somehow their paths had never crossed, until they did, with a little help from Eric's stepbrother Jack. Eric got invited to go skating with Nancy and her closest circle of friends, and afterwards they all went out to a pub where Eric said, "Wait a minute," and he proceeded to introduce all of Nancy's good friends to Nancy, as if she was the new kid on the block. He somehow had met and befriended them all without her knowing about it. Anyway, they finally got together, and as Nancy said, it was like picking right up where they left off. There was a magical chemistry and a level of trust that was truly extraordinary, and they fell deeply in love. When the fellowship ended, Nancy was ready to pick up and move to England with Eric for his next fellowship, but she would only agree to live with him if there was a ring on her finger. Sometimes Eric needed a little push. So without actually ever saying so, Eric agreed. And there came a ring, left quietly on the bed one morning. No Eric, just the ring. That's how we did things. And they married in a small ceremony with just 35 of their closest family and friends on the other side of the pond. There are so many more great stories to tell about all that if we had a few more hours. But my favorite line about their romance that says it better than anything came from Nancy when she said, "I didn't marry a doctor, I married a canoe instructor." That first love spark between the two of them was always very much present. Eric and Nancy's journey had a few more destinations and stopped along the way before settling here in Northern California in 2004. But I'd say the most significant events during the journey were the births of their two children, Sarah and Josh. Eric loved being a father, and he was so very proud of his kids. He was never the demonstrative, huggy-kissy type of father. He wasn't that kind of person. But his love was expressed in deeds and kindness and in being there for them in all those important times. He also loved teaching things to his kids, even if those things were a bit unusual. Like imparting in great detail all the techniques he had learned after doing ski patrol training, or giving Josh medical exams and journals to study when he was doing his own professional continuing education. And Sarah and Josh will never forget the big school projects he helped them with, where Eric's OCD tendencies would kick in, and those projects would be enhanced way beyond any teacher's expectations. Whole ecosystems, right? Above and below the water. Eric might have seemed distant and out of touch at times because he put in such long hours in his medical practice and he worked so hard, but his heart was always with the family. And he gave 150% of his attention when he did take time off, and the family did great outings and amazing vacations together. And you better be ready for it. Because in Eric's mind, vacations were not meant for relaxing and lazing around on a beach doing nothing. They were programmed from sunrise to sundown, jam-packed with activities, skiing, hiking, kayaking, whitewater rafting, you name it. Eric was still that little kid I described with a voracious appetite for adventure, which he now loved to share with his family. There are a lot of people here today, which is a measure of the love and respect so many people had for Eric. Some of you are family. Some of you are lifelong friends or friends from the temple. Some of you are Eric's colleagues, and some of you are his patients from the part of his life that was so central to his identity. Eric loved being a doctor. And he went above and beyond over and over again on behalf of his patients to give them the very best care and attention. He was meticulous when it came to covering every detail, making sure he was doing everything right. His notes from every patient visit were novels, not just a few scratched notes, but running commentary. But even more than that, the thing that was special about Eric was his exceptional bedside manner. Eric treated everyone with so much dignity and love. He made everyone feel special. You just knew he really cared. I'm told some of his patients actually moved from Sonora up to Folsom when Eric moved so that they could still be his patients. That, I'm sure, is a bit unusual, but that's a reflection of Eric's loving care. That's a reflection of his goodness and of his exceptional skill as a doctor. I could go on and on because there are so many good things to say about Eric and so many good stories to tell about his exceptional life. But there are a few others who are going to speak, so I will leave it to them to fill in. And we will want to hear from many of you when we open the mic at the Shiva service following the reception we're going to have, or tomorrow at the Friedman home. In Jewish tradition, we say, may their memory be a blessing. Blessing is something we remember, something we have to say and speak aloud. All of us who remember Eric need to speak his name. We need to tell his stories, to keep the memory of his kindness and his devotion to his patients and his love for his family alive. Today we feel deeply the sorrow of his loss. But one day, these good memories, God willing, will overshadow the loss and will just feel like a blessing and make us smile. Rest in peace, Eric, and may your memory forever be a blessing. We know it will be. Amen. So I'd like to invite Bev, Eric's sister, to come on to the bema and share some of her thoughts.
So I'm Beverly. I'm the much older sister, and the one who probably looked most like Eric. I remember once walking down the streets of Sonora, and one of his patients came over to me and said, "You must be Eric's sister. You look like a little version of him." Do not grieve for the ending. Be grateful for the journey and the memories. My baby brother has always been independent and adventurous. The morning he was born, I went into my parents' bedroom and asked my dad where Mom was. He had no clue. Then the phone rang. It was the hospital. My mom hadn't wanted to disturb my father, had gone into labor, called a taxi, and the hospital wanted to inform us, Paul and I, that we had a new baby brother, a welcome addition. Eric was a force of nature, always moving, always curious. He excelled in sports, played goalie, including for the University of Toronto varsity team. His high school won the Ontario Football Championship, and he even played 1 year of varsity football, bulked up to 185 pounds, drinking raw eggs and protein drinks, and bringing his very large friends over to eat. He loved skiing, biking, hiking, climbing. He had just finished biking around Lake Tahoe. He kept the dogs in good shape, walking, playing, and loving them always. Eric was also creative. He painted, as a matter of fact, in the house. He just finished 3 paintings, one for Nancy, one for Josh, and one for Sarah. They are very, very special. At university, he was accepted to pre-meds, to the Ontario College of Art, and to architecture. He was a Renaissance kind of guy. My girlfriend Donna, who took sculpting with him, remembers how impressed his teachers were and that maybe he should become an artist. And I remember when he was only 4 and he was drawing and I suggested some addition, he turned to me and he said, "Why should I listen to you? I draw better than you." And he was right. I have his painting of my dog Joshua, his sculptures, and even a mobile he made for Beth when she was just very little. I have his art everywhere. It will be a blessing. Eric was also, like Paul, musical. He played guitar to Paul's banjo and we had good folk concerts every time they came in, including with the Rosenberg clan. For David and Jen's wedding, Beth was MC, and she was worried because my brothers were going to do something and they were nowhere to be found. They were housed in a closet writing a new family verse for Jen. They came out, they sang, it was wonderfully successful. Eric was a good, caring friend, a loving brother. I spoke to Eric and Nancy every week, either by phone, Zoom, which is the new gift. And for those listening, I simply cannot believe I will never see him sparkle, share an adventure, or speak reflectively. I always told him how much I loved him. I have no regrets. In August, Eric and Nancy and Sarah came through Toronto on their way back from Chester. We were 13 for dinner at John's Tennis Club. Laura came in and he got to meet Laura's John, and it was a special time. Remember, treasure every moment and remind the people around you how much they mean to you and how much you care. Eric was very close to my mom's family, and they regularly flew in for family functions, including our big Zippin Seders. Our Zippin Break the Fast on Wednesday was bittersweet. As one of my Anishinaabe friends reminded me on September 30th for Truth and Reconciliation, in one hand you hold happiness, in one hand you hold sorrow, life is a balance. Eric adored Nancy and his kids, so proud of them, and how they have grown self-sufficient and caring adults. He talked with pride of Sarah's patience and kindness with children and her technological skills, because Eric was technologically baffled most of the time. I remember Josh and Eric playing desktop hockey at a game at Paul's when Josh was very little. Eric was highly competitive about everything. And so he was happy when he won. Josh was like 4. Paul said, as the caring brother, he should let Josh win because he was the dad. And Eric said, soon enough, Josh would always win. And he was taking pride in winning when he could. Eric took enormous pride and awe in Josh's ability to fix anything and build what was needed during the renovation. In Eric's mind, there was nothing that Nancy didn't know or couldn't do. That was his standard response. Ask Nancy, she knows everything. Nancy kept Eric organized and indulged. He adored her. They had met, as you heard, at Camp Manitou, and I have distinct memories of Eric bringing a whole group home for the weekend, including Nancy, who walked down the staircase, tall, long blonde hair, enormous eyes, and thinking, that's what I wanted to look like when I was. They, thankfully to Jack, they reconnected in Halifax. She was the love of his life. I want to thank the rabbi for taking the time to listen last Saturday to Nancy, Josh, Sarah, and I. It demonstrates caring and commitment. I want to thank those here and those at home in Canada, the United States, and abroad. It brings us strength. I was supposed to fly to California Wednesday. Eric had taken a day off work. We were going to eat, explore, and laugh. Life has many ironies. I cannot believe I will never see him or hug him again. Good night, sweet prince. and flights of angels sing thee to thy rest.
Thank you, Bev. That was beautiful. Now I'd like to invite up onto the bema Elliot Weiss, a very, very good friend of Eric's, lifelong friend.
Thank you, Rabbi. Good afternoon. Some of the things I was going to talk about you've already heard. I might have a slightly different version of events. But as you probably would guess, I've studied the Talmud extensively. Well, not, but I have a quote. There are stars whose light only reaches the earth long after they have fallen apart. There are people whose remembrance gives light in this world long after they have passed away. This light shines in our darkest nights on the road we must follow. So I'd like to shed a little bit of light on the Eric that I know. There are two kinds of people in the world, those who tell stories and those who make stories. As you've heard, for those of you who know Eric well, he is definitely a story maker. I've known him for a long time. It's 50 years is my best guess. And my earliest memories of him began when we were probably age 14 or 15. Earl and the gang were at Eric's house. The Freedmans were sitting Shiva for Eric's father. And I vaguely knew Eric, but not that well. So we were hanging out in his bedroom, not knowing what quite to say because this was new territory for us kids. And I remember we were just fooling around. We were actually having arm wrestle competitions because what do teenage boys do otherwise? And so to move on, in those days we played touch football after, this is when we were in high school, we used to play touch football after school. And we'd head across the street because there was a McDonald's there and eat 20-cent hamburgers. Tells you how long ago that was. We'd play some more and then we'd go home for dinner. During those games, Eric was always clowning around, which he did very well, and he was performing some of his theatrical catches. So I wanted to move on to a few stories, some of which you've heard a little bit, but I wanted to say that in the past I've been accused by some for exaggerating, embellishing, or making up some of my stories. But these are my memories. I apologize if others have a slightly different recollection of the facts. So my first story is about camp, I guess Manitowobbing. It's also known as how Eric met Nancy. And I think it was 1976 or 77, I'm not quite sure. But before he started camp, he called me up one evening and he said, who was your supervisor at the Bay? That's the Hudson Bay Company. When did you work there? What is his or her contact number? So I was a pretty naive kid. I answered all his questions, and after I provided him with my information about a couple jobs, I asked him what was going on. Well, his response was quite straightforward. He said he was applying for a job at an overnight camp north of Toronto as director of water sports or something, and he needed references. And he was of the view that they never checked references, and he was correct. So, I had to ask myself, did he even have any experience in water sports? Well, my references were solid, and he got hired, so he owes me. But how he got the job is beyond me, and there's more to that, but I'm not allowed to talk about those things. But most importantly, that was the summer he met Nancy, and the rest is history. Okay, so I'll fast forward. University of Toronto, 1976 to 1983. Eric and I were both at U of T together. I was in the downtown campus, and he was accepted into Scarborough College, and back then we viewed Scarborough College as the boonies. But Eric was an enthusiastic athlete. I can't comment on his hockey career as a goalie. Bev did that. But he did say to me that he wouldn't get his nose fixed after it had been broken multiple times until he gave up playing hockey. At university, though, he had this brilliant idea that he was going to play football for the Varsity Blues football team because he'd played at the high school level. And the Varsity Blues was the top university team. So he spent the spring and the summer drinking this gross combination you heard of powdered proteins, raw eggs, and this green powder. and it looked gross. But with exercise and diet, he turned himself into a mini Arnold Schwarzenegger. And, we were all jealous, of course. But I have to wonder whether there were some steroids in those concoctions, because, in those days, who knows what was in those powders. He made the first cut, but he was tossed out after the second, and I think it was to the relief of some of the other guys we knew on the team. Okay, so I'll fast forward, because there's lots of medical school stories, some of which is probably not for public consumption. But anyway, he finished his internship in Victoria, a year or two of pediatric training, and then my last story is off to Africa we go. And for me, it was 1986-87. So Eric did not use my references. He applied and ended up working in this Anglican mission hospital in Kenya, in a town called Kikuyu. So Maureen, my wife, and I went to visit him. And it was between, I know we spent New Year's Eve down there, so we went there in late December, early January. We went to Kikuyu, and then Maureen and I went on a camping safari, which was fantastic. So we arrived in Nairobi, and we took the last bus out to Kikuyu and met up with Eric, the Daktari. And there were lots of stories. And Bev told you about some of this, but he was the sole doctor in this mission hospital, which was to be, from a physician point of view, was very primitive. And I did a little bit of reading about ether anesthetic, which started in the 1800s, and he was actually giving the anesthetic. He was using what was called a drop mask. And he would drop ether onto the patient's nose and mouth, and it would put them out. And then he would operate on some Maasai or Kikuyu residents. And I said, Eric, you've done a rotating internship like me. You've done a couple years of peds. And where did you learn to operate on people? So he pulls out this outdated British textbook on surgical techniques, and I swear it was from the 1940s, for guidance. And that was how he learned to operate. And he would show us some photos of his work. So we took him down to Mombasa on the ocean for a holiday, and I swear he slept for 18 hours a day. He was so exhausted. So some of the stories he told me, one in particular, which really we found interesting, is that one of his grateful patients, maybe the same as the chief who gave him the goat, invited him back to their village, and those villages were pretty primitive. And he was being honored, so he was offered this drink of unpasteurized milk mixed with cow's blood as an honor, and he drank the stuff, and he lived. And then he mentioned that he slept in a thatched hut, and I wasn't supposed to say that, but he told me that he was lying in this thatched hut, and he saw the walls moving, and he realized it was all the flies on the walls, and I said, not for me. So, Eric and I just seemed to follow each other around, playing leapfrogging with our lives. Maureen and I moved to Moncton, which is north of Maine, working and raising our family. Eric moves to Halifax to start his urology training. So one day I was at a meeting in Halifax, and I sat beside one of his urology docs that was teaching him, and I asked him innocently how my friend Eric was doing. And there was a pause, and he said, he said that we're trying to beat some old surgical habits he picked up in Africa. And as we all know, Eric did fine and became a very skilled and compassionate urologist. That was Eric. So as many of you know, while he was working in Halifax, he met Nancy again. What he told me, I didn't know Jack was involved, that he ran into her in the ICU. And they lived happily ever after. I have very fond memories of going to Chester. One in particular, I was promised lobster. Sorry, Rabbi. I was promised lobster for dinner. And so, I was starving, and there's no lobster. So finally, Nancy and I went racing all over the place. She probably remembers we couldn't find her lobster shack, so we went to the grocery store and bought some lobsters. And we got home, and I'm going, let's cook these bloody things. Well, no, Eric wanted to have lobster races on the kitchen floor. And I thought, that's cruelty to animals. And then I saw what they actually do to a lobster. The lobster races were nothing. Unfortunately, I was unable to attend their wedding in Wales because our daughter Marcy was born on the same day. And, I really regret it, especially when they went, after the ceremony, I think he went tramping up in the Highlands. I miss that. So there are a lot more stories and memories, but I'll have to stop, at least for now. I just wanted to say that Eric was all about living, exploring, and learning. There was never anything he thought was beyond his grasp, beyond his capability. If it was there, he could do it, he would succeed. He might have had doubts along the way, but he rarely showed them. He radiated positivity and enthusiasm. He was great to be around. He loved life, and I will miss him. Thank you.
Thank you, Elliot. That too is beautiful. And now we have all these stories. And now you understand why I said he just was a big kid, in the best of ways. Please rise for the El Malei Rachamim.
El Malei Rachamim, Shochen Baramim, Hamsei Menucha Nechona, Tachat Kanfei Hashchina, Im Kedushim Utorim, Kezohar Kriya Masirim, Et Nishmat Yeshayahu ben Moshe Brucha Shehalach La'olamo Bal Harachamim Yesterehu B'Sitik Nafav La'olamim V'yitzrar Chaim et nishmato Adonai hu nachlato V'yanuach b'shalom al mishkavo v'nomar Amen.
Compassionate God, eternal spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Eric, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let him find refuge in the shadow of your wings, and let his soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is his inheritance. May he rest in peace. And let us say, in the rising of the sun and in its going down, we will remember him. In the blowing of the wind and in the chill of winter, we will remember him. In the opening of buds and in the rebirth of spring, we will remember him. In the rustling of leaves and in the beauty of autumn, we will remember him. In the beginning of the year and when it ends, we will remember him. When we are weary and in need of strength, we will remember him. When we are lost and sick at heart, we will remember him. When we have joys we yearn to share, we will remember him. So long as we live, Eric too shall live, for he is now a part of us as we remember him. Yitgadal, v'yitkadash, Shemei Rabbah, v'yomad divra cherutei v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayachon u'v'yomechon, u'v'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael, Ba'agala u'vizman kari v'imru amen. Yehi shemei rabbah v'barak le'olam ulomei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh. V'yithadar v'yithaleh v'yithalal. Shemei dekudusha berichu. La'ela min kol birchata v'shirata. Tushbechata v'nechemata. Da'amiran v'alma v'imru amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya. V'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Osei shalom b'mramav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Lech ki shilchacha Adonai, go your way, for God has called you. Lech v'Adonai yiyeh imach, go your way, and may God be with you. V'halach lefanecha tzidkecha, kvod Adonai yasvecha, may your righteousness go before you, and may the glory of God receive you. Let all who are gathered here repeat these words after me, speaking them to the family. May God console you. With all who mourn, in Zion and Jerusalem. Hamakom Yenachem etchem b'tok sha'ar avleit Zion v'Yerushalayim. Now go forth in peace to life. Amen. This concludes our memorial on behalf of the family. We thank everyone for coming and being here today to support and love them. We're going to now go behind that wall right over there into the social hall and have a light reception, not a meal, just goodies. Some of Eric's favorites, brownies with no nuts, Rice Krispie treats, and a few other choices that were on his list of things he loved. And it's a time for us to connect and to continue sharing these great memories and stories about Eric. And for those who can stay after a time of this much or so, we'll come back into the sanctuary for a Shiva Minyan, which is a brief service so that we have the opportunity to recite Kaddish once again. And it's in the context of that that we'll open the mic and invite people to share briefly good stories and memories. So once again, thank you for your attendance, and let's join together in the social hall. Oh, and there is a slideshow that's going to be playing, I think, in the social hall. So enjoy the pictures.